My name is Dr. Keziah Lyu. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and I work in private practice in the Bay Area of California. I am not necessarily any kind of professional runner or work specifically with athletes or runners, but I do, for myself personally, love to run. So I think this presentation hopefully can be tailored a little bit around, just some tools to help with mental health in terms of building resilience, endurance, and just having a good foundation to run and to perform in whatever capacity that you have. So, before we kind of get started into maybe some of the more specific mental health interventions or just like ways that we'd like to talk about mental health and how to have a strong foundation, sometimes an easy acronym we'd like to use for potentially my clients, if you're feeling in any way some type of, let's say, I feel blah, and like I don't know how to describe how I'm feeling. So we just ask potentially like, okay, let's just halt and just check in with my body, right? A lot of times we don't check in with how we're feeling, what we're needing. And I think one big part of building a good mental health or emotional health foundation is also to take care of some of your physical body needs, right? So pretty self-explanatory, like, am I eating regularly? Am I staying hydrated? Potentially, let's say when we are exercising, of course, we are giving ourselves what we need, but what about when we are doing other kinds of things, right? At school or at work? Are we still giving our body what it needs? Are we making healthy choices? Are we taking care of ourselves and doing it regularly? I also think sometimes potentially we can have very unhealthy eating habits and eat a lot at one point and then not so much later on, or we go for the sugar, for the snacks, and that is not always what we need. And then next we have maybe just check in with your emotions. So noticing a lot of times at the end of the day, a lot of us also just carry a lot of stress or tension in the body, right? Like in our shoulders, in our back, any amount of our bodies. And then I think sometimes we feel like something is off, but we haven't necessarily processed anything that may be causing distress from the day. So I always encourage my clients, let's find a way to at least express how you're feeling or acknowledge, like, hey, this had happened, or I had this happen while I was exercising. Someone said something to me and I feel really maybe upset. I feel sad about that. And maybe if you need to, then you go for a run or do something where you can express that feeling, introduce some movement into your body, let it kind of diffuse, sort of ride the wave. We like to say that emotions just come through and we sort of release it through the body. I think pretty easy as well, but a lot of times when we're feeling not so great about ourselves, we can withdraw or isolate. If anything, COVID also showed us that it's really important to stay connected to other people and to have good relationships with other people. Sometimes it's also hard to accept help and support from those who care about you. So, making that conscious effort to like maybe just let someone know, like, hey, this happened, or I didn't have such a great run today, or I feel much more tired maybe than I do other days, but that's okay because someone can just listen to you and accept that. And then you move forward and you continue. A lot of times we're also exhausted. Like, I don't know where each person is coming from, but sometimes there's such a emphasis on productivity or busyness, or just for me, I personally am a busybody, so I'm always constantly doing something and I don't make time to have breaks, to sleep well or practice good sleep hygiene. So just making sure you have also, again, like a good rhythm of eating regularly, but also like sleeping regularly, giving your body what it needs. And then maybe a step further is the importance of self-care. So I do think for any person, of course, we always have a lot of priorities, whether it's work, school, relationships, other kinds of activities that we're part of, but sometimes we don't cultivate regular self-care habit. Again, all of these are just like it sounds, like making it a priority, making it a habit. I think a lot of times there's also a very glamorized idea of what self-care should look like from media, or this very extravagant, expensive kind of a thing. But it sometimes can just look like, hey, I'm going to set aside 5, 10 minutes I'm going to journal or I'm going to practice some mindfulness, some meditation, 10 minutes right before bed. A few minutes is better than no time at all. And of course, like cultivating healthy activities that count as self care. So, again, paying attention to all kinds of needs of yours. So, like our social needs that we want social support. Maybe we want to connect to is some spiritual meaning or something that we feel like is higher than ourselves. Physical needs, eating, sleeping, emotional, like I'm feeling really stressed. I want to, yeah, again, go for a quick walk, take a lot of deep breaths, and kind of release those feelings that I'm carrying in my body. And then, of course, making time for things that are relaxing. Because again, I think for myself too, I don't make enough time to actually let my body relax or calm down. And then I'm always in this sort of high stress, high cortisol kind of mode. And that's actually really unhealthy and toxic kind of for the body. So finding ways to, again, relax and consciously tell your body, like, okay, it's time for me to engage in the parasympathetic and go back to kind of a baseline. And then again, keeping up with self care even when you're feeling good. I think people tend to throw it out the window when they don't need it or feel good, and then they don't know how to pick it back up when they need it. A little further into potentially thinking more about mental health specifically is we like to use this idea that we have this cognitive behavioral triad where our thoughts, our behaviors, our feelings, they're all impacted by each other. So, for example, maybe I'll use the example of a lot of times when something happens in our lives, we do have potentially some automatic belief or even judgment that comes up. So let's say I have a moment where I feel like I'm not doing so well today. And then my thought about myself is that I'm a failure or I'm doing poorly. And then potentially, let's say when I have this thought, potentially I would do something. Let's say then I would say, oh, I don't want to run today, or I like withdraw from other people because I feel like a failure. I feel defective. And then again, that's related to the feelings that we have, which is like, I feel lonely or I feel sad because I feel like I have this thought that I am a failure. I'm withdrawing from people. I don't want to go on a run today. So I feel sad. And then it just kind of continues to cycle through. And we can sort of ruminate or worry. And they sometimes sort of become a self fulfilling prophecy. I think it could be helpful just as an exercise sometimes too, if we find ourselves getting really stuck in a certain thought pattern or behavior, or we have like feelings that we can't really get rid of, is to kind of maybe even just put this on paper and say, like, hey, what's going on? What was maybe the trigger event? And maybe how do I break out of the cycle? So oftentimes when I work with clients, I'll probably say, okay, the thought is like, I feel like a failure, but maybe the more balanced, healthy thought we want is that today I feel tired, but I'll do better tomorrow. Or maybe the most common one we use is I'm doing the best that I can. And that maybe it means like, okay, with that thought, maybe I can go on a brief walk or jog, but maybe I don't need to push myself too hard, but I'll still do something. So I don't want to reinforce this thought that I'm defective or I'm a failure. And then in turn, then I don't feel as lonely or I don't feel as sad about myself. So again, kind of finding these ways to interrupt the cycle or booster our own emotions or kind of our emotional health. So, kind of in line with that, there are some certain kind of thinking traps or negative sort of thought patterns that we find are common, and they kind of are what they sound like. So, this is an easy way potentially to say sometimes I get really stuck in like catastrophizing. So, like maybe I start to feel some brief knee pain on maybe the first leg of my trip. And then I come home and then I catastrophize and I think the worst about it, like, oh no, I have an injury or I need to go to the doctor or there's something significantly wrong. Black and white is sometimes we also call it all or nothing or just very extreme thinking. So there's no gray area. It's just like, I am a failure or I am, I don't know, a winner or I'm doing the best or I am the best, but there's no gray where it's like, okay, when I compare myself to others, maybe that I am doing as good as some people and I'm doing better than other people, but not this I'm like, oh, I am just completely a failure or not doing well. Emotional reasoning is sometimes believing that our emotions are kind of the truth. We like to think of, or we like to explain that our emotions are very natural reactions to our situation, our environment, but it doesn't necessarily like mean that they reflect the truth of the situation. So sometimes potentially we get really upset. Maybe then we assume like, oh, this is maybe I am an angry person, or this person tried to make me angry, when it may not have actually happened that way. So that might be kind of tied also to personalization, where we might take other people's behaviors personally or feel like they are trying to blame or attack us, when that might not be the intention, but we're putting judgments where we're sort of labeling as well, like, yeah, this person is mean, or I'm angry, or all these kinds of judgments we may make sometimes. Jumping to conclusions, similar. Overgeneralization is also similar, where we might take one instance and try to say like, oh, this happens all the time, right? And maybe that happens a lot in couples and in relationships, when we just say, oh, our partner always does this thing, and you feel like, oh, you're never good enough, you don't feel cared for by the other person. Same as well with must and should statements. Those are, again, just digging a little deeper. I think a lot of us to some degree have those statements that like, oh, maybe I should feel really ready to run every day, or like I must make it through even if I'm going through so much pain and injury. But I have these like sort of more rigid rules of what my life should look like. And again, it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just taking a look at these maybe thought patterns that we have and just seeing if they continue to serve us, I think. And then maybe lastly, dismissing the positives. I think also, let's say we are running or we get into a race and we only kind of see maybe the areas that we've fallen short, or we compare our times to the other runner, or we don't get the place that we want or the time, and just not being able to kind of see the bigger picture and just dismiss all of the positive aspects of maybe our performance or what we did do well. So just being able to hold both and be balanced in that. Another big sort of concept that we like to use sometimes or teach, and that kind of underlies sometimes a lot of maybe when I work with a lot of people with anxiety or depression, there is sometimes a really hard, maybe struggle or desire for some sort of control or some resistance to potentially change or what's actually happening in their lives. This term that we use sometimes, it's like radical acceptance, right? Is that we can only kind of focus on the things that we can change and not dwelling too much on the things that we cannot. So, yeah, trying to embrace that change is a part of living, that we want to focus on the things we can do. And that means that I'm trying to sleep well before a race. I did all my training that I could, and I got myself to this point. But there are some things that you can't change, and not getting too caught up in those things or being flexible. So again, just focusing on the situation as it is, and that would lead to less anxiety, less anger, less stress. We like to sometimes use gratitude as an exercise, like learning to identify things that you are grateful for, keeping things in perspective. And again, yeah, sometimes some people feel like acceptance just means this sort of passive resignation, which is not necessarily true too, that it's not the same as really liking the circumstance or condoning the circumstance, but it's sort of accepting potentially your limits and the idea that potentially you're only human and the only things you can do are the things you can do for yourself. So maybe trying not to stay too much or ruminate too much on the things that cannot be changed or not within your control. In some of my work or in a lot of psychological research, it's now being found that potentially the best indicator for someone with good psychological health is this aspect of self compassion. And in research, this is from someone called Dr. Neff. She's done a lot of research on self compassion, and she's kind of broken it down into three components. And again, these are also some ideas that we like to teach in general to practice as like healthy psychological concepts or practices. So first is mindfulness. And again, it's used in a lot of meditation practices, very much with breathing and sort of staying present. Mindfulness is this being aware of the present experience in a clear and balanced manner. So again, it doesn't mean making judgments, or it doesn't mean sort of trying to make something happen. It means just being open to the reality of the present moments, just allowing anything to enter your awareness. So how you feel in your body, maybe how you feel emotionally, try to encourage you to just observe your thoughts. And you don't have to resist, you don't have to judge them, you don't have to avoid them too. I think sometimes some people feel really uncomfortable with being in their body and being uncomfortable with their emotions or the thoughts that come up. So, yes, just being allowing the truth of your experience, and then not getting carried away into like what happened maybe before or what's going to happen in the future, just staying present. And then I kind of alluded to this concept of common humanity, which is another component of self compassion, which is this idea of that we're all in some ways interconnectedness, that we are all flawed, we are all works in progress, that everyone, has good days, has bad days, we make mistakes, and we experience some suffering and some pain in life. And in that is unavoidable for everyone. But a lot of times when I would say a lot of clients that I work with, or even potentially for myself, sometimes I feel like when I'm not doing so well, or I'm feeling a certain way, I feel pain, I feel hurt. I don't want, or I feel like I have less understanding for myself than for other people, right? I'm very understanding towards others, but in this way, I sort of isolate myself and feel like I'm alone when I suffer. But in this concept of common humanity, we kind of embrace the idea that pain is part of the human experience. And in being able to accept that, and that we all are sort of works in progress, that we can connect with others, that no one's maybe better or worse than the other, but that we are all kind of working through our own struggles and our own pains, and also being able to enjoy victories and things like that with each other. So, especially when we think about how rampant maybe comparison is in our day and age with social media, or just race results, or Strava kind of rankings, or how much people are training, or how well people are doing, maybe even just trying to cultivate this idea that, okay, but I am also in my journey and I'm improving myself while other people are too. So, trying not to get into that comparison game, because that would, of course, make you feel more anxious, more depressed, but trying to embrace that we are all sort of in this together. And then, lastly, maybe more commonly, what we think of self compassion is this idea that we're simply kind to ourselves. So, I think it's really sometimes tied to potentially when we're growing up or in our family, that sometimes we are more likely, or others in our lives have been more likely to criticize, or to say, hey, you should have done better, or you didn't do the best you can. And then when we become adults or older children, teenagers, we also give ourselves a hard time. We're more likely to beat ourselves up and kind of put a supportive arm around our own shoulder. So instead of being so harshly critical, when noticing our shortcomings, we just try to also be our best cheerleader, not our worst critic, but our biggest supporter, right? And instead of sort of attacking and berating ourselves, we offer ourselves warmth and sort of unconditional acceptance. I know some people think, oh, this might mean that I would let myself go, or I'll just let myself just do whatever I want. But I think in the concept of self compassion and self kindness, it's because you care about yourself so much, you will also encourage yourself to do your best. So it is not an excuse necessarily for not trying and not trying to go further and improving yourself, but it's what you do when you do need it, right? Like as a good friend, that you offer yourself kindness and understanding. I think what also kind of sustains anxiety and stress is this idea that sometimes we avoid what's most scary to us. So, whether it's we don't want to look at our time for our races, or we don't want to go run because we're afraid of how we'll feel, or pain, or just feeling like we can't do it. This is just the idea that to be able to sort of break the cycle of anxiety, we also have to sort of repeatedly expose ourselves to the things that scare us. But that will help us in our patterns of learning and in our brain to sort of change the associations we have with those things that are difficult. And the goal always is just to build our courage and confidence to confront it. So sometimes we don't think we can do something or we can't run a very far distance, but it's setting these realistic, kind of achievable goals to be able to get there. I think sometimes people think New Year's resolutions are coming around the corner. We have to do this huge thing to prove that we can sort of change our lives around. And then we get discouraged when we can't meet them. So, again, taking small steps and small goals to show ourselves that we can do these things. And then just lastly, here are two brief practical skills. So the easiest ones we like to use are box breathing and the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. Box breathing is a way to maybe cultivate mindfulness. It is just as it sounds that you can pick a certain number, 4 counts, 5 counts, 6 counts, as much as you can hold. And you just inhale, you hold, you exhale, and hold for a couple of counts. And it's a great way. Maybe I can imagine even right before a race, right before a run, or even after a run, anytime that you want to center yourselves in the present moment. Let's say you're getting really caught up in worries and stress. You can again come back to your breath and then maybe even just imagine your thoughts drifting away like leaves on a stream, clouds across the sky, and just come back to the present moment. And then, similar to box breathing, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method is a method we like to teach as grounding, where you just focus on things that are present again, that you focus on things you can see, things you can feel, things you can hear, maybe what I can taste in my mouth. But again, a good way to counter any significant anxiety that's coming up when anyone's having sort of a panic attack or getting really caught up in worries. This is a great way to again come back to the present moment and center yourself. In conclusion, again, just developing a healthy mental and emotional foundation is important to a successful running journey. Running is so integral. Exercise is so integral to your human body. It boosts the mental health, but also having some good mental health habits, self-care habits, it's also will influence running and just performance in general. Developing a really realistic but simple goal just so that they can feel like they can do it, right? Because I think, yeah, we don't want them to try to do something that they can't and then just never touch it ever again. So sometimes I'll tell them, like, okay, for today, you're just going to try to like go find your shoes and put them on and take a walk. And then just, yeah, start there, find a buddy. Maybe sometimes some people like to have some sort of reward or some motivating factor. Like, okay, I'm going to do it in the morning, then I'm going to go get coffee, and then I'm going to feel good. So just setting themselves up for success in those little ways as well. Potentially, it's, yeah, emphasizing sort of self care. And again, the basics like, are you making sure you're sort of eating regularly, sleeping, because she might be too exhausted, right, to even engage completely some self care or even just breaks. There's not much, let's say, days off or things like that, but maybe is she still like every hour or two making time, maybe just make 5 minutes, do some box breathing, go sit outside, get some fresh air. Because again, sometimes like we go through our whole day, we don't make time for breaks, or we don't tell our bodies to consciously sort of get back into our parasympathetic nervous system. We're on like fight or flight the whole day, and then we're exhausted and we just are so burned out. Even just encouraging her to take moments in her day to de-stress, check in with herself if she needs a journal, anything like that, or even talk to a friend might be kind of helpful, at least in this time while she's trying to navigate what that means with her priorities. Sometimes some people can find it very maybe not supportive or not validating if someone's just trying to talk them down. So what we often will tell our clients, or that research has shown, that sometimes emotions are actually very temporary, as in maybe from the start of a wave or a bell curve of an emotion lasts about 5 to 7 minutes. It is also okay to kind of just sit with someone through it and just kind of ride that wave, I think what is tough is, let's say, if your body sort of went on hyperdrive, fight or flight, they are hyperventilating. That's when sometimes I'll encourage some of that grounding skills, the box breathing, the staying present. Anything that could maybe, if they're having such an intense physiological reaction, anything that is quick to kind of get them out of that would be helpful too. So let's say we encourage like cold water on the face, or maybe taking a hot shower if they can, doing any maybe like very fast jumping jacks, any kind of stretching to release tension. When you kind of tense something up, release it. That's also helpful to get the tension out. Maybe a quick jog to get it out. Tell your body now, like, yeah, you're safe, you are grounded, maybe how long it takes, it's okay. And again, coming back to the present moment, because I think emotions can last a lot longer with that cycle. If you're continuously ruminating, like, I'm not doing well, then the panic attack lasts for a really long time.